6. 3 p.m., Saturday, December 24th, the next day. I was really getting used to controlling till now, and wound the oar around adeptly, exclaiming in wonder. You know, it's truly impressive how much you built. A gravelly, deep voice came from the mid-sized boat moored just to the right.
You should have seen the bear forest yesterday. We had 2 axemen with us, so the material gathering didn't take long. Then again, we focused on the normal wood, so it's nothing to brag about.
The voice belonged to a large man with a shaved bald head and a short beard stubble. He'd been practicing his ship steering until late into the night. His oarsmanship was quite impressive. So you didn't have to line up at the old man's place then?
Nope. We were the first ones there after the guide came out. Boy, the DKB didn't like it when they showed up second, 5 minutes later. You were the ones who collected the data, right? I gotta thank you for that.
No big deal, I mumbled, feeling guilty about the fact that we were still covering up half of the quest-related info. He smirked at me knowingly. The man's name was Agile. He was the leader of a 4-man party that maintained a neutral position among the frontline players. Between the twin powers, Dragon Knights Brigade and Aincrad Liberation Squad guilds. He and his 3 companions, with their double-handed weapons, sat in a mid-sized gondola painted a calm brown shade. Due to the haste of their construction, the boat didn't have any options such as the battering horn, but the passengers' imposing weapons seemed capable of making up for that. The name Pequod was written in black ink along the side. I didn't recognize the source of that name, but Asuna, in her red hood, noticed it at once. The Pequod isn't a very optimistic name for a boat like that, Agile roared with laughter, and one of his companions, bearing a 2-handed hammer, grumbled.
That's what we told him.
Asuna noticed a giant question mark hanging over my head and turned around to explain. The Pequod was the name of Captain Ahab's ship. It gets sunk by Moby Dick in the end. I see.
And why did you choose that name?
I asked the bald man, who grinned again.
Think of it this way. I can't sink until we fight that big white whale, right? And from what I hear, you don't fight a big whale here, but a turtle.
He pointed a thick finger ahead. The Tilnal and the Pequod were moored at the entrance of the Caldera Lake just north of the center of the 4th floor. The pure blue lake, over 300 yards across and surrounded by a sheer cliff, had to be paused to reach the south half of the floor. In other words, we were waiting here to take part in the battle against the field boss who guarded the path ahead. In the beta test, this was the mouth of a volcano with red, glowing magma bubbling up from the cracks in the earth. It was many times more beautiful now that it was filled with water, but it was uneasy about fighting a boss on a boat. After all, if the player steering the boat fell into the water, it could no longer be maneuvered. The crashing of a gong interrupted my thoughts. The sound was coming from one of many other boats that I had praised just moments earlier. Ahead, to the right of the Tilnal, were 3 gondolas pointed away from us, their bodies painted blue with white trim. The one in the center was a 10-seater, the largest kind of Romolo could make. The other 2 were 4-seaters, like Agile's. Each one had an extra space for a gondolier, so in all, they could carry 21. As the blue color suggested, they belonged to the Dragon Knights Brigade. On the left were 3 more gondolas. Their bodies are moss green with their broadsides a dark gray. Each of the 3 were sized for 6, once again totaling 21, when boatmen were added. These were the ships of green-themed Aincrad Liberation Squad. On the 3rd floor, each guild had numbered 18, so they must have picked up 3 more over the course of this floor. If I didn't get a register soon from Argo, I couldn't be able to keep track of their faces and names anymore. I searched closely for Morte, the mysterious swords/axeman who I dueled against the dead of night, but his trademark coif was nowhere to be seen. Even with all the available manpower they had, it was incredible that both guilds had managed 3 gondolas in each span of a single day. It took 3 hours to build 1 boat, so the final one must have been finished just barely before our meeting time. NPC or not, Old Man Romolo must have been exhausted from working around the clock. The clanging of gong was coming from DKB Mothership, the largest present. The gong was at the prow and must have been an option for a larger size. The ALS looked on with distaste as they hadn't been able to procure. As Lind held up a hand to stop the gong and address the crowd. "It's time. We're about to begin our battle against the Biceps Archillion, field boss of the 4th floor. None of us have any experience with a major water battle aboard ships, but there's nothing to fear. As you've seen in fighting ordinary monsters, their attacks are almost entirely absorbed by our ships." "Easier for you to say, in that giant cruise ship," I grumbled mentally. He raised his right hand in the air and clenched it into a fist. "As I explained in our pre-battle meeting, the Archillians' attacks are quite simple. As long as we watch out for the direction its 2 heads are facing, we can avoid taking any charges. We will use this gong to signal the timing of evasion, so please keep an ear out for it." "And we were the ones who found out that info for you," I grumbled again. Naturally, there was a price for sneaking ahead of everyone to get our ship first. So, as a member of this community, I suppose it was our duty to scout ahead and learn what we could. I figured they might as well saddle us with the duty of charging front and center in the fight, but that role went to the DKB and the ALS. In this fight, the minor parties, Asa and I, and Agile groups had to attack the boss sides, which were virtually impervious thanks to the creature's thick shell. "Let's move out and take formation as the boss appears. Dragon Knight Fleet, forward!" Lind cried, swinging his arms forward. The DKB mothership, Leviathan, and its 2 escorts began to move. Cabal growled at his guildmates on the left side, not wanting to be left behind. "Come on, let's get going! All the ships at top speed! Liberation Squad!" With an "Aye aye, sir!" the Hellsmen of the Unleash rode onward, and their consorts joined in. "Welp, guess we should get going," I said lifelessly, while Agile smirked and thrust out a heavy fist.
"Let's show them that we're not playing second fiddle here."
His trio of teammates roared in approval, and Asuna nodded with serious intent. It wouldn't do for me to be left out of the group, so I lamely raised my hand and joined in the center. The field boss of the 4th floor dungeon was a huge water monster named Biceps Archillion, and true to the name, it was an ancient 2-headed turtle. It had 3 attacks: a bite attack from both heads, a water smack from its side fins, and a charge, making use of its 60-foot length. As Lind had reassured us, the bite and fin attacks weren't that powerful, so letting the ship absorb the damage if necessary was a valid option. The charge attack was a real problem, and it would probably be enough to capsize our ship if stuck true. According to Lind's report, a capsized boat recovered automatically after 30 seconds, but until then, the crew had no choice but to cling to it, leaving them vulnerable to bites and fin slaps. Fortunately, a few seconds before it started one of its massive charges, both heads would point in the same direction. If we watched for that motion and made sure to avoid their line of sight, it shouldn't be hard to avoid the charge. The Leviathan's gong crashed, and Lind shouted, "Evade!" Up ahead, 4 gondolas split left and right from their positions directly before Archillion. We were on the left flank of the turtle, but I backed up the Tilnell just in case. A moment later, the draconic heads of Archillion rose high in the air, and its 60-foot-long bulk tore forward. Spray showered down on us, and the waves in the wake of its passing rocked the boat. I stood the oar up to balance against the rocking so I could look around. None of the other ships had capsized. The boss HP gave was nearly halfway gone, and at this rate, the battle would be over in less than 20 minutes. I set the gondolas after Archillion's new location, and Asuna turned back to me, rapier in hand. "Hey, what kind of boss was here in the beta?" "Well, it was still a turtle, but more of like a giant tortoise. Very tough, but slow. I don't remember having so much trouble." So I suppose it must have gotten an update along with everything else they decided to soak in the level of water. Well, of course. I mean, it's to be expected. All the doors to the buildings and towns were the 2nd floor to start with. Whoa! One of the ALS 6-man gondolas raced past, knocking the tiny Tilnell off balance. As they passed us, the riders left us a heartwarming message.
Even the Great Beater ain't gonna win the LA today.
After it left, Asuna stomped her foot on indignation. What's the big deal? This formation was their idea to begin with. Now, as long as we stay to the side, we don't have to worry about the boat getting damaged, I said smoothly, moving us back into position at Archelian's left flank. The attack and damage caused were the fiercest at the heads, where the DKB and the ALS kept 2 ships each. The third ship from both guilds were at the tail, which also suffered some damage. This was all according to our plan. We and Agile had to take the sides, sheer walls of the dark gleaming shell. Even Asuna's Chivalric Rapier +5 could barely scratch the boss's HP. I watched her shoot off the parallel sting 2-part combo out of sheer frustration, and used half my brain to engage in some idle thinking. The later stages of shipbuilding quest were not mentioned in Argo's strategy guide. When the guide appeared in the late afternoon yesterday. This was both because of the unknown nature of Nolza's strength and the fierce rivalry between the 2 main guilds. There was nearly open warfare outside the Forest Elf camp on the 3rd floor between the DKB, who were undertaking the Forest Elf side of the campaign, and the ALS, who were aligned with the Dark Elf faction. My arguments fell on deaf ears, and we nearly had player-on-player violence. Only the advent of the powerful Knight Kismel succeeded in staying their blades. After some discussion, both guilds agreed to put the campaign quest on hold, thus averting the collapse of the Frontline Collective. However, the latter part of the shipbuilding quest seemed to be related to the campaign. If we publicize that information, they might take the teleporter back to the 3rd floor and renew the quest. We had to ensure that the 2 guilds did not resume butting heads again. So after the discussion with Argo, Asa and I decided not to reveal the connection to the Fallen Elves, but Lind and Cabal weren't leading their guilds for show. It was very possible that they would discover the continuation of the quest on their own, and if that happened, there was nothing we could do. Then again, with their great numbers and massive ships, apparently reckless boating, they might not even succeed at trailing the guild's transport ship. If it was a fact that the pitch competition between the 2 guilds was speeding our progress along through the game, but the lack of any kind of stopping force, if their competition crossed a healthy line, was terrifying to me. We needed a 3rd power. It could be a small scale, but something with enough influence and leadership qualities that Lin and Cabal couldn't overlook it. A linchpin in the frontline force as a whole. At present, the closest thing to that 3rd power was Agile, the Axe Warrior, currently fighting on the opposite side of the giant turtle shell. But he and his 3 companions intended to maintain their position as a free-roaming, neutral force. They only joined the group for field and floor bosses, and barely ever appeared otherwise. The only other person with capability of being that linchpin was Asuna the Fencer, with her flashing Chivalric Rapier. After we fought Ilfang, the Kobold Lord, on the 1st floor, I told her that she should be strong, and if anyone she trusts invited her to a guild, not to refuse. That there were the limits to what could be accomplished in solo play. My instinct wasn't wrong. If anything, I was underestimating her potential. If she got more accustomed to this world and learned more about the game's rules and quirks, Asuna could easily lead a guild of her own. That guild could admirably serve as the 3rd power to balance out the ALS and DKB. But as long as she was with me, the beater, she would only be shunned within the group. She would never be seen as anything other than a willful outsider, showing up where she pleased and leeching hard-earned items and information from more worthy people. If the sake of the front line as a whole and the Asuna as an individual were to be taken into account, then maybe we shouldn't have it be a duo forever. But the existence of Asuna's Chivalric Rapier, with its absurdly good stats, and the bottle of Keala that granted her an extra skill slot filled me with unspoken dread. I wanted to prioritize her safety above all else. Yes, I was concerned for her well-being, but the truth was that there was another bigger reason that drove my choices. An egotistical one. Somewhere in my heart, I was afraid of her gathering more attention and eventually being called to take a leadership role. Kirito, the gauge is about to drop into the red! I was snapped back up to the present. Up above the looming mountain shell of the bicep Archelian, the 2-bar HP gauge was on its last legs. More than a few bosses changed their attacks patterns once in the red zone, so I pushed the boat backwards just in case. But the 4 ships trained at the heads of the turtle during the brunt of the damage were still right there, hammering even harder than before. The players lined up along the gondolas facing the turtle, set off sword skills left and right, enveloping our Chilean's 2 heads in colored light. The HP gauge dropped further, under 10% mark.
Hey, everyone, get away!
I heard Agile shout from the other side of the turtle shell. I was already at a safe distance, just far enough back to take in the entirety of the beast. Its 2 heads, front and rear flippers, and tail were all twisted up at the sides of the shell. I'd never seen this animation before, but I sensed what it was. Watch out! It's going to spin! I was very much doubted that it would spin enough to fly like a certain movie monster, but even the largest gondolas would certainly capsize if sucked into a giant whirlpool, if it didn't crash into another ship first. But neither the guild retreated, even after our warnings. They probably hoped to take it all the way down into the burst of sword skills, but the spinning preparation raised the boss's defense, and the HP stubbornly refused to drain away.
They're in big trouble at this rate, Kirito,
Asuna cried. That settled the matter. I ordered my partner to duck down, then rode madly. As the Tilnell raced forward through the whitecaps, and the Archilian massive body tensed powerfully. If we charge in and take all the glory again, it's just going to make our reputation worse, I thought briefly. But then I changed my mind and pushed on with one last row.
Screw that! I'm not giving up my position!
The burning red ram at the front of the Tilnell plunged deep into the softer gut of the Archilian, just before it could begin spinning. After a brief moment of silence, a few white steam vents burst out of the shell. The entire form of the turtle bulged outward, shrouded in blue light, and exploded. I looked up at the listing of coal, normal loot, and last attack bonus, and thought, good grief, I did it again. Asuna stood up at the prow of the boat and slid her rapier into its sheath, then glanced skeptically at me. Sorry about charging like that, but it looked like the turtle was about to start something bad. Yeah, it's fine. But what did you mean by my position? I didn't know if telling her what I meant, my position as gondolier, would fly as an excuse. But fortunately for me, she didn't press any further. So I quickly guided the boat toward the exit of the caldera. We zoomed past the Dragon Knights and Liberation Squad, who looked mighty peeved, pissed, and petulant for having just defeated the field boss, and waved Agile's team as they shot us thumbs up on the way out of the lake. After a brief trip down the river, we had reached the small village of Usko. You know, I've been noticing, I started to say to Asuna. She was clearly deep in thought, as it took her a few seconds to turn around and respond. Huh? What? Oh, it's nothing serious. But I was noticing that the travel from town to town on this floor hasn't been easy. In the previous few, we could just sprint our way down the path, but here you've got to swim or paddle. You're right. Plus, there's the occasional monster in the river. People coming for sightseeing will be satisfied by Rovia alone, I'm sure. But I wonder how Argo's doing here. Speaking of which, I wonder if she'll be stuck in the main town at this time.
No looking down on me, key boy.
I'm not looking down at you, but what? A familiar voice sounded in my ear that should definitely not have been present, and I nearly fell out of the boat. I lost my balance and caused the oar to slip, rocking the gondola. Asuna abruptly had to regain her balance up front and turned back in surprise. Traveling just to the left of the Tilnell at the exact same speed was the unmistakable face of Argo the Rat. She wasn't swimming, she wasn't riding on a boat either. She was gliding on the surface of the river like a water strider. What the heck is that? Did you become an apprentice to those doofus ninjas from Fuma Ninja Force?
Hardly. I found these babies in town.
She slid along the water on one leg, raising her foot high as I could see. Instead of using her usual boots, she was wearing sandals equipped with very light-looking wooden floater paddles, an item that gave the wielder the ability to run on water, no doubt. Well, they were selling those things? What's the point of going to all this trouble to build a ship? The rub is they require a ridiculous amount of agility to equip. You gotta lower your weight as much as possible when using them. Tip your balance even the tiniest bit, and you'll flip over. No way to fight when using these babies. Oh, doesn't seem like you've given much up of your gear, I remarked, looking sidelong at her. As far as I could tell, she was still in her familiar hooded cape and didn't seem much lighter than usual. The rat's face crinkled into a smirk, and her painted whiskers twitching. Is that how it seems to you? Never know. Might be wearing nothing at all under here. Yeah? I started to turn my head to check, but I felt a stare inflicting piercing damage on my forehead at the front seat and turned to face forward. Argo chuckled again. While the face, Asuna cleared her throat to ask a question. Argo, would you like to ride with us to the next village? We have an open seat. Oh, thanks! I'll take you up on that! The rat nimbly leaped up into the gondola and took the leather seat just behind Asuna. The two girls abruptly began whispering to each other. As I picked up the gondola's pace, I silently hissed at the old man Romolo. Gramps, you should have told us that a two-seater actually holds 3. If the main town of Rovio was the city of water, then Usco was a floating village. It was made of about a dozen shacks, walkways, open spaces, buoyed by balsa-like logs, floating and creaking in the midst of the crescent-shaped lake. It was certainly more picturesque than the plain little rundown village of the Beta, but it felt likely to get a low-grade seasickness if I spent more than a little time there. Then again, motion sickness came from the inner ear, so the fact that the signal movements were bypassing that to the brain directly means that there was no seasickness here. In fact, I don't recall anyone on the front line feeling sick while riding on the gondolas. We stopped the Tilnal at the dock at the edge of town and moored it there, then headed to the center of the settlement to only restaurant there. It was still early in the day, but surely we could be allowed to toast our triumph over the field boss. I did my very best to avoid looking at the bare legs of the clad floater in sandals peeking out from Argo's cape as we walked down the boarded, floating walkways. Eventually, we came to a tropical-themed restaurant. There were no players sitting in the open terrace facing the lake, of course. I sat down at the special seat in the center and ordered drinks and appetizers from the scantily clad NPC waitress, then leaned back in the wider chair and stretched. We're finally halfway done with the 4th floor. You say finally as if it hasn't been 3 days since we got here. We're much faster paced than the 2nd or 3rd floor, Asuna pointed out. Wait, really? We got up to the floor on December 21st. That makes it the 22nd, the 23rd, 24th. Oh, you're right. You're not old enough to be going senile yet, key boy, Argo chimed in. I grinned and then shot back at her. You never know. In real life, I might be an old gentleman spending his retirement enjoying a good MMORPG. Then I'll have to start calling you Key Gramps instead. Never mind. Please don't. As we bickered and joked, a tray of brightly colored cocktails arrived. We clinked our glasses, and after downing over half of the lychee-scented juice, I let out a very long breath. Once we'd eaten something, I was pretty much ready to walk next door and fall asleep. But there was business to conduct. I shook my head to get to the proper mood. The DKB and the ALS will be here very soon, so we shouldn't pick up all the quests in this village and start on some easier ones. We'd finished all the ones short individual quests in Rovia aside from the shipwright of Yore yesterday, while the guilds were a bit busy building their gondolas. That had earned us quite a bit of experience, but we were also well above the proper level for this area, so it wasn't enough for a level up. We'd probably get there within 2 to 3 quests from this village, so my proper gamer instincts said that I should hit that point before I slept. Asuna and Argo looked at each other, then spoke in turn. I don't know about Agile's group, but the big guilds are going back to the city for today. So there's no need to rush through all the village quests today, Keyboy. Huh? They're going back to Rovia? Did they leave some quests behind? I said, confusing. The two girls shot me a questioning look. So, you didn't get invited, Kirito? Invited to what?
Nothing to be disappointed about, Key Boy. We'll be here with ya.
Disappointed about what? Didn't you just say what day it was? What? Oh, you mean December 24th, I said, then frowned. A few days ago, it had occurred to me that some special day was coming up. December 24th meant the day before December 25th, making it something Eve. Wait, you mean Christmas whatever? And that's why the DKB and ALS went back? Is that why they were in such a rush to beat the field boss? I said, flabbergasted. The girls nodded, together, their faces sympathetic. But nothing could have prepared me for what Asuna said next. Yes, you see, tonight the two guilds are going to hold a united Christmas send-off party.
What? United party? You mean they're... But what?
My what the hell scream turned into a sonic boom that ripped the lake apart and shook Asuka with a magnitude 7 earthquake. From what I heard later, the Christmas send-off party was a sumptuous, free, all-you-can-eat and drink event held in the teleporter square of Rovia starting at 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. They didn't advertise it far and wide with bulletin boards and flyers. I wouldn't have noticed if they had, but they did manage to draw nearly 200 non-frontline players through the word of mouth alone. Between the first major player-run event and the unpredictable weather, it caused quite a hullabaloo. Aside from the food arranged by the sponsors, some merchant players set up food carts of their own, and there was even a young female blacksmith who set up a stand for weapon repairs. The idea came from ALS, apparently as a way to make good use of all the crab, shrimp, and bear meat they'd accumulated on their questing. Calling it a Christmas party would attract attention from other players, both increasing the guild's profile and acting as a good recruitment opportunity. When the DKB learned of this, they tried to set up a competing event, and after much squabbling over the use of Teleport Square and Rovia, the two groups decided to make up and throw the party together. Well, I suppose I should be happy they managed to put on an event together, but calling it a send-off party is a bit weird. Isn't that usually when you throw a big competition or traveling somewhere new? It seems backward for people who are going off to the Labyrinth Tower to throw their own send-off party, I grumbled, as I slurped the remaining of my lychee juice and poked the food to the tray. Asuna looked like she didn't know whether to feel sorry for me or laugh at me. She nodded softly. It wasn't like nobody suggested inviting you to the party. You're one of the frontrunners too, Kirito. But some folks in the ALS wondered why they should pay for free food and drinks for a guy who always steals the LA bonuses. And they ended up deciding that you didn't need an invitation. Who did you hear this from, by the way? From Shivata and the DKB during the field boss strategy meeting. He also asked me to apologize to you for them. They did say I could go if I wanted. And I got a lot of instant messages from other people. By the way, Agile's team is going back to the city as well, but only to finish up their quests, not to participate, so you don't have to sulk so much. So you fancy yourself a solo player, don't ya? Suddenly, Argo burst out with a series of eerie, smirking giggles. What's up with you? Oh, nothing. Now, if you don't mind, I'll be getting back to the main town, she remarked, slipping out of her chair. Stunned, I asked, Already? If you're going to leave so soon, why did you even come out here to this village? To gather data on the quest shops and selections, of course. I'd like to pop in and send-off party, too. Well, so long, H-Han. Key boy. She waved briefly and grinned and added, Oops, I nearly forgot. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Argo. Take care, Asuna said. Many Christmas, I joined in, feeling like I didn't quite have that right. Before I knew it, the information dealer was gone. Argo should have been the first one invited to the Christmas party. No kidding. With ultra-elite VIP status, I agreed, finishing my juice. At the very moment, Argo was out collecting information on the businesses, wares, and the quest NPCs of Osco. Her drive for information, whether it's safety of the town or hazards of the wilderness, it was an invaluable support to our progress in a game of death. But more than a few players in the two guilds still felt distance hearing the name Argo the Rat. They seemed to think that the former beta tester had solemn duty to provide the information for these invaluable strategy guides for everyone was using. In the face of this expectation, Argo's policies of selling anything she could and getting her money's worth were distasteful. To be sure, she would even sell what we just talked about if someone wanted it and paid the price. Even a friend like me had to filter what was said around her. I didn't know why she pursued such an unfriendly policy. She would probably sell me the reason if I asked. One day, I'd buy the reason from her. Price be damned, I told myself, setting the empty cocktail on the glass of the table. So, what do we do now? I started, then realizing I hadn't checked in something with her first. If you want to go, I'm not going to hold you back. My temporary partner looked surprised at that, so I added, if you got formally invited to the Christmas send-off party and you're refusing because of me, you don't need to. Oh, that? She interrupted, cutting me short. She snorted. Don't bother yourself. I had no intention of going from the start. I'm not the one for flashy parties. Oh, I see. Well then, before I could suggest that we clear up 2 or 3 quests and level up before nightfall, I stopped myself. I had no particular attachment to Christmas Eve, but that didn't necessarily hold true for Asuna. She knew what day it was, and talented fencer though she might be, she was still a young woman, I thought. Do you want to try it here? Try what? Having our own Christmassy thing. The fencer stared right into me, her eyebrows tensing, as if simulating several possible answers. She ended up choosing the turn your head away in a half-huff response. No, it's not necessary. I don't have anything prepared, and it doesn't feel right, like on Christmas in this tropical island village. For a moment, I almost thought the weather controlling system heard her. The onslaught of golden afternoon light abruptly dimmed, and the sparkling blue surface of the lake went cloudy gray. A chilly wind from across the lake rustled her long hair. No way, she whispered, following her gaze. There was a tiny white dot falling silently in the cloudy sky. It caught the breeze and wandered over to the open terrace of the restaurant to land on my gloved hand. The white dot melted promptly, leaving a tiny chill on the palm of my hand. Then came another and another. Soon there were countless white points dancing in the air. It's snow, I mumbled. True, it was December, but I'd felt I'd never seen snow in Aincrad before. In fact, I'd hardly felt what it was called wintry chill. According to what I read in the article before the game trapped me inside, SAO was supposed to recreate the actual seasons outside, depending on which floor one was on. But the 4th floor couldn't be one of the specially aligned ones. This snow must have been from a special holiday event, just for Christmas. Soon, the huts of dried tropical grasses were white with snow. Some NPC children raced along the nearby walkways, giggling and screaming. As I took in the surreal sight of Tropical Island, turning into a wintry wonderland, I heard a reluctant sigh from behind me. Why did it have to do this? I looked back to see Asuna watching the snow with wide open eyes. I couldn't possibly read the expression on her face. At the very least, I knew that the little white fluffy dancing past her white-brown eyes was beautiful. Eventually, she noticed me, staring at her, and blinked several times. Just when we escaped the main city and came here, so I could avoid thinking about Christmas. She mumbled, It's not fair. Huh? You were trying not to think about it? But didn't you say... I pressed my fingers to my temples and dredged up to my memory on the conversation from nearly 2 weeks ago. Didn't you say that it might snow on Christmas when we're tackling the 2nd floor labyrinth? She pursed her lips in mild embarrassment. I'm surprised you remember that. maybe I did say that, but I'm in no mood to enjoy the holiday given the circumstances. We should be pushing farther rather than throwing parties. Besides, you didn't even bring it up until just minutes ago. Huh? Bring what up? As soon as I asked, she gave me a dirty look. If you wanted to have a Christmas event, you should have told me a few days earlier, so I could have prepared. And if you're not going to bring it up until the day, it's only natural to assume you weren't interested in that. Huh? Prepare? Prepare what? I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. The 3 essential elements of any Japanese Christmas celebrations was fried chicken, cake, and presents. The first 2 could be arranged at an NPC shop, but not the presents. I didn't have a single considerate item that Asuna might be happy to receive in my inventory. Of course. So bringing it up to the suggestion of a Christmas party was not to be taken lightly. Then again, if I really inspected my entire item list, there might be a surprise here or there. I thought stubbornly. But it was a meaningless idea. When Asuna said she didn't have anything prepared, she was talking about Christmas presents. And knowing her perfectionist nature, she would not have settled for picking out a present from her unwanted leftovers, rather than something conceived as a gift from the start. Besides, it was clear from Asuna's explanations that she was pretending to shun the big Christmas party in town and focus on the game's rationale, because I hadn't said anything about the holiday before now. It was my fault. I'm sorry, I said automatically. Huh? No, you don't need to apologize, she said, surprised, but I kept my head bowed low. No, I brought up Christmas on the 2nd floor, then forgot all about it by the time we got here. It's messed up. If we can't take our mind off the game for this day at the very least, this is kind of throwing me off, she said awkwardly, and I looked up, half afraid of what I would see. She shrugged and didn't really look that angry. Listen, if I really wanted to have a Christmas thing, I should have spoken up about it, but I didn't, so you don't need to apologize to me. I'm happy just seeing all of this. I looked out at the village again. The steadily falling snow was already piling up 2 inches high, which made it look like the village of Usko itself was faintly glowing. It did put me in the traveling mind, but I knew if the snow was falling over in Aincrad, there must be a better view for it. The stunning setting of Rovia was no doubt improved even more with the coating of snow, but there would be beauty to spare in the forest of Zumfut, Urbis nestled in the mountains, and even the town of beginnings at the very bottom. But while it would be very easy to travel between these cities with the teleporter, getting back to the gate was far too much of a distance. We'd have to travel across nearly half the 6-mile wide floor to get to the gate. It would be surrounded by all members of the DKB and ALS in the midst of their party. Now wasn't the time to show up in their midst. We'd have to find some place here on the 4th floor to be the setting of our white Christmas. Suddenly, an image flashed into my head. A place I visited in the beta, a dusty bidding jutting out alone in the wide, wasted landscape of sands and rocks. But there was no more dry, dirty wastelands of this floor anymore. Yes, that spot would do. Hey, Asuna. What? She tilted her head toward me. I cast my hesitation aside and made a suggestion. It's not something physical I can give you, but there's something I'd like to give you to make up for it. She stared at me with large eyes for a few long moments, then mumbled, Well, you're free to offer it. Just don't expect anything in return. We refueled on consumable items in the snowy Usko, and went ahead on accepting quests, then setting off with a Tilnell again through the falling powder. If this was happening in the real world, there would be plenty of discomfort. Too cold, not enough visibility, snow piling in the gondola. But in the virtual world, the worst that happened was slightly worse vision and nothing that interfered with our rowing. The boat passed through the evening crescent lake and to the river that exited to the south. There was no hint of monsters in the water, either due to it being Christmas Eve or to just too cold for all the snow. I used it to my advantage to pick up the speed, and we slid smoothly over the placid surface. Eventually, the faded gray tower loomed in the far distance. It was the labyrinth tower of the south tip of the floor that means which we would be reached the next floor up. It would still be nearly 2 miles away, but the menace of the boss waiting on the highest level managed to prickle the skin. You aren't taking me there, are you? Asuna turned around and asked me quickly. I quickly shook my head. No, our destination is over there, I said, pointing out the southeast branch of the fork in the river up ahead. Eventually, the cliffs standing tall over us to either side began to change color. The blackened basalt-like rock features and the fine horizontal lines carved right across like engraving. Using my memory of the beta and the map in my menu, I took us left and right through several branches in the river. About an hour after we left Usko, our way was blocked by a nearly pure white wall at the end of the dimming valley. Hey, it's a dead end, Asuna shouted, and I only put more strength into my rowing. Don't worry, that's where we're headed. But I can't see what's ahead. What if there's a wall? We're fine. It's just normal mist. Well, not normal exactly. She turned back, skepticism over her face. I grinned back at her and shot the Tilnell right into the thick white fog. Within seconds, I couldn't even see Asuna sitting 7 feet ahead of me. When I sucked in a deep breath, the chilly dampness of the air contained the fresh, lively scent of forest. Huh? Wait, is this mist actually... She couldn't even finish before the mist abruptly cleared away, restoring our view. It was a great circular lake, several times larger than the Caldera Lake, where we had fought the Biceps Archilian. The falling snow dyed most of the surface white. I pulled the oar from out the water and let the ship coast forward. As the Tilnell silently glided through the world of white, a black silhouette eventually appeared ahead. It was a fearsome grand fortress, standing tall in the middle of the lake. 4 towers of differing heights stood over the roof of the building, thick with snow, each one waving triangular pendant. The featured of the cross-horned scimitar on the black field. Is that the dark elf thing? Asuna cried, her voice ragged with surprise and hope. I already knew that there was a dark elf fortress here. In the beta test, the elf war campaign quest resumed here with another series of brief duties before ending in a long dungeon that carried the story over to the next floor. But here in the retail game, there were already major differences from what I remembered. The fallen elves were making deals with the water carriers buy a huge quantities of lumber, and shadowy figure named General Nolza was overseeing their operation. These things were not present in the beta. Because of that, I was planning to only visit this fortress once I had collected as much related information as I could. But given that we're on the 4th day on this floor, we'd be heading into the Labyrinth Tower much quicker than the 2nd or 3rd floor. Asuna and I were probably the only people actively following the Elf War questline among the frontline group now. So if we didn't act with haste, the 2 guilds would pass by and leave us behind. But this reason might been nothing but an excuse. I just wanted to show my partner this sight. It's beautiful, Asuna murmured, staring at the snowy castle as we approached. More beautiful than any castle I've seen in real life. Are you talking about so-and-so castle at theme park? Or the real thing in Europe? I asked carefully. She smiled and didn't elaborate. Castles were fantasy RPG staple, but this might have been the first proper castle in Aincrad so far. The building's design was about the same in the beta, but the impression it left was completely different now that in the midst of the picturesque lake rather than a flat, dried basin, especially on Christmas Eve, frosted with a layer of snow. The dark elf army fortress was walled with white stone, its steeply angled roof gray slate tile. Orange light spilled from its countless arch windows, a perfect counterbalance to the indigo gloom of the evening. The building itself was completely isolated from the surrounding land, and several black gondolas were moored at the long pier straight outside the front gate. Guided by a lantern emitting the bluish light at the tip of the pier, I had slid the Tilnell into a space empty along the dock. No alarms had sounded or guards had come running yet. I stashed away the oar and leapt onto the stone pier, then turned to catch the expertly tossed rope and place it over the bronze bit. Asuna reached over for a helping hand to step off, and we walked into the middle of the pier for a better look. The front gate was still a long distance away, but the castle's grand visage was clear to behold. The highest of the towers had to be more than 150 feet off the ground. The scale of the structure rivaled that of a giant baobabs that made up the city on the third floor. Orange light on the third window spilled into countless roofs, peaks, and eaves. I stared at the fantasy sight until a small voice hit my ears. "Thank you. It's a wonderful present." "Well, as long as you think so. It was worth rowing across the entire floor to see." I glanced over at her and grinned. "But that's only half the present." "Oh?" I put my hand on her back and gently pushed, urging her on. She would figure out before long, so I had to rush my prospective partner along to preserve the surprise. Ahead of the pier, the massive gate made the dark gleaming plates of thick metal, which very large, heavily armed by elvish standards guards on either side. I took one look at their stunning long halberds and had to steel myself to push forward. The moment I came within 20 feet of the gate, the right guard barked, "Halt!" Meanwhile, the left one said, "This place is not for humankind." They crossed their halberds in midair. I was relieved to recognize the same lines of dialogue from the beta, and pulled out what I had prepared from my belt pouch and held it aloft. "My name is Kirito. I request an audience with the master of the castle." The dialogue probably wasn't necessary, but I wanted to play the part, so I stifled my embarrassment and pushed forward with it. The two guards looked at the sealed scroll I held aloft, bearing the same seal as the one on the castle flags. The invitation given to us by the commander of the Dark Elf forces on the third floor. Their halberds clanked back to the standing state. The next moment, the massive metal gate split open with a deep rumble. I breathed a sigh of relief and nudged Asuna into the castle grounds. The next moment, a cry of surprise escaped her lips. "Oh!" The castle's front garden enveloped us with all the beauty of a great work of art. Trees, planters, and cast-iron fences, all frosted with powdery snow, were glittered in the light of the lamps. The long approach to the castle doors was absolutely pristine, not a single footprint. I almost didn't want to step into it. If everything was the same in the beta, we'd have to be able to walk freely about the castle. Between the dining hall, the various stores, and even the dungeon-like cells, there was plenty of worth of exploring. But our first destination was already set in stone. We opened the door and walked inside. Asuna exclaimed in wonder again. In the center of the main hall, with its red rugs, was a marble fountain filled with glittered water. Beyond that was the grand staircase, and a wide hallway that extended to the left and right. Familiar Dark Elf NPCs glided toward on the sound of unseen violins, but unlike the third floor, very few of the elves had weapons. "I don't see any players," Asuna remarked, then nodded to herself. "But of course there aren't. That wall of mist we passed through to get to the lake was switching us to an instant map, wasn't it?" "Good answer. We will never run across another player here, so we're free to laugh and scream and sing all we want." I wasn't going to do any of that. "Anyways, let's take a look around," she said. Her aggrieved look giving away in her excitement, she tugged on my sleeve. "Sure thing, but I already know our first destination. This way." I pulled her hooded cape in return and dragged her down to the hallway to the right. Yofel Castle, the Dark Elf fortress, was laid out in such a way to the main building connected to the four main towers in the shape of a rectangle with one open side. For the most part, the right side of the castle was the station for soldiers, while the left side housed the castle's inhabitants and servants. But I wanted the center courtyard. We walked down the hallway, past several soldiers, then turned left at a corner. I found a small door straight ahead and softly pushed it open. Back out into the open air, we were met by a place less dazzling than the front gardens, but somehow more mysterious and sacred. Thorny hedges sprouted like little black flowers, blocked the way left and right like a maze, preventing us from seeing farther ahead. We walked over the snowy cobblestone with the plain lantern light as a guide. As I could see, that someone left footsteps down the center of the path. Asa and I shared a look. We hurried along the trail before falling snow covered the tracks. When we had passed through the thorny maze, we ended up in a beautiful garden, surrounded by stunning conifer. Brick flower planters, bronze benches alternated around the tree. Its jutting branches kept the snow back, so the footprints disappeared like the entrance of the garden. But we didn't need to follow them anymore. Before our eyes, seated silently on one of the benches, was a frail figure. It was barely more than a silhouette from our location, but there was no need to get closer for a better look, or call out, or squint to bring up a color cursor for identification. As soon as I took the first step forward, pulled toward the figure, it noticed us and stood up, leaping over the planter next to it with all the force of a thrusting sword skill. The person landed lightly in front of us and braced us with open arms. "Kirito! Asuna!" The familiar, silky voice sounded. Doing my best to withstand the ribcage hug attack delivered with elite-level strength, I managed to grunt, "Good to see you again, Kismel."